Years after Layne Staley left this world, one question still lingers in the hearts of his fans. What really happened in those final hours? Some accounts say that Mike Starr, the former bassist of Alice in Chains, was there right before Layne died. They say he left without calling for help. Some believe it was a tragic misjudgment in a moment of panic. Others point to things said to have gone missing from the apartment, a scratch on the collective memory of the fans that has never faded. But beyond the debate and the speculation, what remains most is a sense of loss. Loss for a voice that could make the whole world fall silent. Loss for a man who seemed to have given up long before anyone realized. What truly happened behind that closed door? Stay with us, and we'll follow the traces left behind. Chapter 1. From a stage-shy kid to the voice of a generation. Years later, Layne Staley would be remembered as a singer whose voice could hold an entire hall in complete stillness. But the first time he held a microphone, it was because someone all but dragged him onto the stage. His mother remembered, "He told me, 'Mom, I'm not a singer.'" Yet when the music started, Layne opened his mouth, and the room went silent. Someone who was there recalled, "We didn't know what we were looking for until we heard him sing." Layne Staley was born on August 22, 1967, in Bellevue, a quiet town near Seattle. He was the only child of Philip and Nancy Staley. But that peace didn't last long. When Layne was 7, his parents divorced. His father disappeared from his life almost entirely. His mother later married a man named Jim Elmer, and Layne took the Elmer surname for school registration. From a young age, Layne stood apart from other kids. At just 2 or 3 years old, he was already banging on drums in a neighborhood kids band. At 9, in a school-issued All About Me booklet, he wrote his life goal in clear letters: "I will be a singer." Most children change their dreams countless times. Layne never wavered. Music in the Staley home was a treasure chest. His parents owned classic rock albums: Black Sabbath, The Stooges, Twisted Sister. Layne absorbed every riff, every lyric. He was drawn especially to the heavy, darker sounds, as if they spoke a language only he could truly understand. But that childhood also had its shadows. A childhood friend remembered that Layne bristled whenever someone called him Rutherford, the middle name given by his biological father. He hated it so much that he had it legally changed to Thomas, inspired by drummer Tommy Lee of Motley Crue. It seemed to be more than just a name change. It felt like a way for Layne to sever a part of his past he wanted to forget. As a teenager, Layne began joining school bands. He started on drums, but in his mind, there was always a voice saying, "You need to sing." He tried his hand with local, glam rock groups: long hair, tight leather pants, heavy eyeliner, a striking image in an otherwise quiet town. Off stage, though, he was different: quiet, reserved, and rarely willing to discuss family matters. His mother remembered a defining moment. Layne almost skipped an audition for a new band. "Mom, I'm not a singer," he told her. But when he finally stood in front of the microphone, the room fell silent. One witness recalled, "He sang, and I thought, God, this is the voice we've been looking for." Music gave Layne an escape, a way to be seen for something other than the abandoned boy who kept his feelings locked away. But even as that voice began to open doors, Layne clung to an old habit, hiding himself from the world and stepping forward only when absolutely necessary. Can you imagine? A kid with a voice that could silence a room, yet having to be pushed onto the stage just to sing. Perhaps from those earliest years, Layne had already learned the art of retreat, and that instinct would remain a part of him until the very end. Chapter 2. The first meeting with Jerry, and the secret no one spoke of. The first time Layne and Jerry met, there were no fireworks, no historic handshake, just two strangers in a cramped room, and one thing they would never speak of again. Seattle, in the late 1980s, was a city quietly simmering with a new wave of music. Cramped bars and musty rehearsal spaces became testing grounds for everything, from sound to lifestyle. Everyone there was searching for a break or a way out. In 1987, Layne was fronting a small funk band. Jerry Cantrell had lost his mother just 3 weeks earlier, playing guitar for Diamond Lie while drifting between places to sleep. One night, Jerry walked into a gig where Layne was singing. He later recalled, "I couldn't take my eyes off him. That voice, it was heavy as lead, but it lit up at the very end of a note." A few weeks later, they met again at a party. When Jerry mentioned he'd been kicked out of his place, Layne didn't hesitate. "You can crash at Music Bank." It was an old building, split into rehearsal rooms, with long, smoke-filled hallways and bare bulbs casting a yellow haze. Their room had peeling walls, a few worn mattresses in the corner, and battered speakers stacked against them. A friend remembered, the door was always locked. If you knocked, you'd wait a long time before anyone opened it. No one knew what went on inside besides the music. Years later, some would say there was more in that room than guitars and drums, things no one ever wanted to describe. When Layne's funk band fell apart, Jerry asked him to be the lead singer for his new group. Layne said no. Jerry persisted, holding auditions right there in their room, so Layne had no choice but to listen, one singer after another, until a male stripper walked in to try out. Layne laughed and finally agreed, on the condition that Jerry play guitar for his own side project first. That project quickly collapsed, and Layne turned his full attention to Jerry's band. Alice in Chains was born, with a sound both powerful and haunting, the music that would take them far beyond that damp room and onto the world's biggest stages. Still, Music Bank remained a question mark. There were nights when Layne would disappear for hours during rehearsal, returning with a faraway look and a quieter voice. Jerry never asked. No one else did either. Maybe everyone understood. Some things are better left unknown. Perhaps along with the music, Music Bank held a silent contract, one that would follow Layne for the rest of his life. Chapter 3. When Alice in Chains exploded, and the cracks began to show. A small boutique named Saturdays in downtown Seattle. Light spilling through the display window, reflecting off silver necklaces and lace dresses on the rack. Layne walked in, a sweet scent with a trace of cigarette smoke drifting through the air. Behind the counter stood a dark-haired young woman with smiling eyes. That was the first time he met Demri Parrott. Friends said the moment felt slowed down. Demri looked delicate, but her eyes carried a certain defiance. She modeled for photo shoots, took small acting roles, but like Layne, she carried wounds that didn't heal easily. They spoke as if they'd known each other forever. Soon, they became the couple everyone thought was meant to be. Their love was intense, nights spent listening to music for hours, mornings waking up late among piles of cassette tapes. Friends described Layne and Demri as two people who saw the world through the same foggy glass, a vision few could understand. But they also shared the same dangerous weakness. Both were pulled into drugs. At first, it was just for fun. Then it became routine. Then it was woven into every day. A close friend said they could laugh all day, then disappear at night without telling anyone where they went. The next morning, they'd be back, quieter, their eyes more distant. Layne kept a small wooden box, locked tight, filled with handwritten letters, photographs, and trinkets only they understood. No one was allowed to touch it. Demri once joked, "If you lose that box, you'll lose your heart." In 1992, Layne and Demri got engaged. But by then, drugs had sunk deep into their lives. Demri's health began to fail, and complications set in. Layne tried to quit more than once, but every time he did, Demri relapsed. When Demri tried, Layne slipped. It was as if they were bound by a rope, dragging each other down. On October 29, 1996, Demri died from heart complications caused by a blood infection. She was just 27. Layne took the news as if part of him had been torn away. From that day on, he nearly vanished from public life. His apartment became a fortress in the outside world, reduced to the occasional phone call. Demri's wooden box was never found. A friend who visited Layne's apartment later said there was still a perfect space for it on the shelf, as if he had never accepted it was gone. No one knew where it went, or who took it. Perhaps Demri's death didn't just take away Layne's love, but buried the last part of him that still wanted to live. Chapter 4. Demri Parrott, Love, Loss, and the Turning Point That Made Layne Disappear. On April 10th, 1996, the stage of MTV Unplugged in Brooklyn glowed with dozens of candles. There was no screech of electric guitars, no flashing colored lights, just Layne Staley, seated in the center of a circle of golden light, his deep, resonant voice pulling the audience into another place entirely. But within that fragile beauty, there was something no one could ignore. Layne was so thin that his bony hands seemed hidden inside his sleeves. When he looked down at the floor, his eyes seemed far away. Fans seated close later recalled moments when he pulled his hands back from the microphone stand, almost as if afraid someone might glimpse what was hidden beneath the fabric. Only a few months earlier, Rolling Stone had run photos showing visible needle marks on Layne's arm. The public had begun talking about drugs more than the music. Dirt and Jar of Flies had taken Alice in Chains to the top, but Layne's health was in a free fall. A studio technician who worked with him remembered, one day in the middle of a recording session, Layne disappeared. When he came back, he was silent, his eyes distant. No one asked, because we were afraid of the answer. His manager had even hired security to keep him away from the source, but no one could watch him 24 hours a day. After Unplugged, the band's tour schedule thinned out. Layne still sang as if he poured his entire soul into each lyric, but between performances, he returned to his apartment and shut the door. Friends rarely saw him, hearing only brief messages left on their answering machines. Short, sometimes only a few words. A close friend recalled, he didn't want fans thinking drug use was cool. But the heartbreaking thing was, some people would come to him bragging that they used because of him. It left many believing Layne felt both ashamed and powerless against the public image that had attached itself to him. That night on Unplugged, Layne sang Nutshell, a song that sounded like a confession. We chase misprinted lies. We face the path of time. Many said it was the last time they truly saw him alive within the music. Others believed that by then, Layne already knew he didn't have much time left. Perhaps, in the glow of candlelight and the sound of applause, Layne was saying goodbye, and no one realized it. Chapter 5. The Years in Hiding, and the Controversy Around Mike Starr. April 4th, 2002. Seattle was draped in a thin curtain of rain. Mike Starr, the original bassist of Alice in Chains, stood outside the apartment where Layne had hidden himself away for years. It was Mike's birthday, and he wanted to visit an old friend, a decision he would carry with him for the rest of his life. The door opened. Layne stood there, so thin that his oversized sweater looked ready to slide off his shoulders. His face was hollow, his eyes deep-set, but they still lit up for a moment in recognition. "Come in," he said quietly. Inside, the apartment was dim and silent. The desk lamp cast a small pool of light over a cluttered table, a few CDs, a video game console frozen mid-screen, prescription bottles mixed with used syringes. The air was heavy with cigarette smoke, and something else you couldn't quite name. Mike sat across from Layne. "Want me to take you to see a doctor?" he asked. Layne shook his head. His voice was rough, tired. "I'm fine." But his breath was short. Every sentence seemed to cost him effort. Mike said he was going to call for help. Layne tilted his head, his eyes both pleading and firm. "No, don't." They talked about old tours, random memories. But every time Mike looked into Layne's eyes, he saw an emptiness. One close friend had said that in his final years, Layne feared hospitals so much he would rather endure the pain than be taken there. The mood sank lower. Mike brought up calling someone again. Layne suddenly grew tense. His voice rose, edged with anger. They exchanged sharp words. As Mike moved toward the door, Layne said, "Not like this. Don't leave like this." Mike paused for a second, then opened the door and walked down the stairs. Outside, the rain had turned heavier. Mike didn't look back. Years later, speaking on the radio, Mike said he was the last person to see Layne alive. His account immediately stirred debate. Some fans believed Mike knew Layne was in danger, but feared the police, because both men were tied to drugs. Whispers spread that Mike had even left with some of Layne's belongings that day. Nothing was ever proven, but suspicion lingered. Layne's family never blamed Mike. His mother once said, "Layne would say, 'I did this to myself.'" But for Mike, it was different. He carried that guilt until the end. In 2011, Mike died of a drug overdose, closing a circle of tragedy and taking with him answers only he would have known. If Mike had stayed that night on April 4th, 2002, would Layne's story have ended differently? Chapter 6, April 5th. Coincidence or fate? April 19th, 2002. The Seattle sky was a thick gray with a light drizzle falling. Nancy McCallum, Layne's mother, stood outside her son's apartment, hands trembling as she gripped the spare key. Beside her were a few police officers. For 2 weeks, no one had heard a word from Layne. Unpaid bills and unopened letters piled high. His accountant reported that not a single cent had moved from his bank account. Nancy knocked. Silence. She knocked harder. Still no answer, only the faint sound of a cat meowing weakly from inside. A police officer gave a signal. The lock was forced. The door swung open. The apartment was dark, heavy with dampness and a sharp, stale odor. On the table, dusty stacks of letters and magazines. Layne's cat shuffled out, its fur matted. In the corner, Layne sat slumped against the sofa. No breath. The coroner would later estimate he had been gone for days, around April 5th. That date was not just any day. 8 years earlier, also on April 5th, Kurt Cobain had taken his own life in Seattle. The coincidence unsettled many. Did Layne choose that date? Or was it a cruel twist of fate? The autopsy listed the cause as an overdose from a mixture of heroin and cocaine, a speedball. No signs of a struggle, no suicide note. The door had been locked from the inside, but some details didn't fit. Friends remembered a small wooden box in the apartment, where Layne kept letters and photos of Demri. When they entered on April 19th, the box was gone. No one knew when it disappeared or where it had gone. A neighbor claimed that days before the body was found, they heard faint noises from the apartment late at night, like someone moving furniture, then silence. Police found no evidence of forced entry, but if no one came in, where did those sounds come from? In the scene report, police noted a game console still switched on, the screen frozen on a game. Beside it, a half-finished drink and discarded syringes. Nothing revealed exactly how the final moments unfolded. A medical examiner remarked, "We couldn't pinpoint the exact time of death, but based on the body's condition, he likely passed alone, quietly." Although the official cause was ruled an accidental overdose, the questions linger. Why April 5th? Where was Demri's wooden box? And what was the source of the noises the neighbor heard? Did Layne orchestrate his own ending? Or was it a chain of coincidences that led to a locked room and silence? Epilogue. Layne Staley, a legacy that endures, and questions that remain. Layne Staley never sought the image of a tragic legend. He just wanted to sing, to let the music reach someone lost in the same darkness. Yet, for many, his name is now bound to two things: a haunting voice and a life consumed by shadows. In the early years of Alice in Chains, Layne redefined how a rock singer could convey pain. He didn't scream, didn't overplay it. Each lyric felt like a slow, deliberate cut. Songs like Nutshell and Down in a Hole were confessions, making listeners feel as if he was speaking for them. But after Demri Parrott's death, Layne retreated from the spotlight. Occasionally, someone would spot him in Seattle, thin, hands trembling, avoiding eye contact. He lived almost reclusively, speaking on the phone more about video games and books than music. When the news of his death spread, fans were not entirely shocked. They had sensed it for years, but they were still heartbroken. Debate erupted around Mike Starr, the last person to see him alive. Starr said he left after an argument and never returned. Some blamed him, others defended him. Certain details from that day remain unconfirmed to this day. Layne left behind a musical legacy that keeps Seattle remembering him alongside Kurt Cobain and Chris Cornell. But his story is also a warning about loneliness and about the cries for help we so often overlook. And the questions still hang in the air. Why did Layne die on April 5th, exactly 8 years after Cobain? Who took Demri's wooden box? And what truly happened in those final hours? Perhaps only Layne knew. And he took those answers with him, leaving us the songs and a locked room.